Have you ever wondered how incredibly ancient social systems manage to adapt, transform over centuries? Sometimes in really surprising ways, even when everything around them is changing. It's like watching a huge, slow river carving out new paths, but, it's still fundamentally a river. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the Indian caste system. It's a topic lots of us have heard about, maybe, but perhaps haven't really grasped all the details, especially how it actually works today, so far from its historical roots.
That's exactly what we're aiming for. We'll unpack this really intricate system for you, using insights from, well, a whole range of historical and sociological sources. Our goal is to pull out the most important bits, help you understand its unique features, how it started, how it functions, on the ground, and how it keeps evolving. Hopefully you'll walk away feeling well-informed, maybe with a few aha moments about one of the world's most enduring social structures.
Yeah, we'll be looking at classic academic papers, historical accounts, and also contemporary studies that really shed light on this fascinating and, let's face it, complex subject. So, okay, let's unpack this. Where do we even start with something so deeply rooted? Well, maybe the word itself, caste. I read it comes from the Portuguese casta, meaning lineage or race. That right there kind of gives you a first clue, doesn't it?
That's a great place to start, actually. And defining caste is, well, it's surprisingly tricky. Different scholars focus on slightly different things. But there are definitely some core characteristics that pop up again and again. First, and this is probably the most fundamental, is hereditary membership. You're born into your caste. S.V. Ketkar, one of the early scholars on this, really highlighted that you usually stay in it for life. It's not something you, choose.
Right, so it's not like joining a club or changing jobs. It's like your family name, but it defines a whole lot more about your social place. That's quite powerful.
It really is. And tied right into that is endogamy. That means strict rules about marrying only within your own caste group. Almost everyone who studies caste points this out. Then there's hierarchy. It's not just different groups existing side by side, they're ranked, often based on ideas of purity and impurity, usually linked to traditional jobs.
Like a ladder, maybe, where traditionally priests doing pure work are at the top, and maybe someone dealing with waste or leather work seen as impure is way down at the bottom. That ladder thing helps visualize it.
Exactly. That latter analogy works well. And this ranking led to all sorts of restrictions, things like who you could eat with, how you could interact socially, even what job you were supposed to do. Your birth often kind of set your career path. And many castes also had their own internal organization, like a chief or a council to, manage their own affairs, sort out disputes within the group.
Okay, so if birth sets your group, and the group has all these rules, you might think they're totally separate worlds. But how did they actually sort of fit together in the bigger picture? Did they interact?
That's a really good question because it leads to this idea of socioeconomic interdependence. It's a bit of a paradox. While castes were separate and ranked, they actually historically really relied on each other for goods and services. Think about a farming family. They'd traditionally need a potter, a blacksmith, maybe a barber, all likely from different caste groups or essential services. It was this complex, interconnected web.
That paints a much richer picture. So not isolated islands, but connected through this web of needing each other. Okay, let's dig into the actual building blocks of this system.
Absolutely. When we talk structure, 4 key terms usually come up. Varna, Jati, Gotra, and the Jajmani system. Let's start with Varna. These are the 4 main, really broad, sort of pan-Indian divisions. You've got the Brahmins, traditionally priests, scholars, then the Kshatriyas, warriors, rulers, Vaishyas, merchants, traders, and Shudras, artisans, laborers. There's also the group historically considered outside this system, the untouchables, now often referred to as Dalits, placed right at the bottom. The traditional divine origin idea says these Varnas came from different parts of the god Brahma's body, like a cosmic division of labor. And the top 3 Varnas are often called twice-born because they traditionally had this second spiritual birth ceremony.
Right, Varna. It sounds very grand, almost like a theoretical blueprint for all of India. But didn't you say the sources point to something else being the real unit on the ground, something more practical?
Yes, exactly. This is where it gets really interesting. While Varna gives you that big picture hierarchy across India, it's Jati that scholars like M. and Srinivas identified as the real unit. Jatis are much smaller, they're local, they're the actual endogamous groups, the groups you marry within. Think about it this way. There are thousands of Jatis all over India, not just 4 Varnas. Each Jati usually has a specific traditional occupation linked to it and a certain degree of cultural autonomy.
Okay, thousands of jatis.
Yeah.
Why is understanding jati so important for getting the everyday reality of caste compared to just the four varnas? It sounds like jati is what people actually live day to day.
You've absolutely nailed it. Jati is the lived experience. It dictates traditionally who you marry, the work your family does, who you might share a meal with. Varna is more abstract, like a large umbrella category. Jatis are the concrete, local communities. And also, the idea of a dominant jati is really important here. A jati becomes dominant in a village or region not just based on ritual rank, but if it has, say, the most land, the largest population, economic clout, maybe better education, often being the first to grab opportunities like English education. So real power on the ground isn't just about ritual status, it's often about land, numbers, and economic muscle.
So local power dynamics are key.
Got it.
And the next term was Gotra. What's that about?
Gotra. This refers to a clan lineage, and it works as a rule of exogamy within the endogamous jati. Basically, even within the jati you're supposed to marry into, you're traditionally forbidden from marrying someone from your own gotra, your own clan line. It's another layer of marriage rules, preventing marriage between close relatives.
Wow, okay. Layers upon layers of rules. And finally, the Jajmani system. What was that exactly? How did it work?
Right, the Jajmani system. This was a traditional way of exchanging goods and services between different castes, mostly in villages. It was really prominent in medieval times and continued in places much later. You had families, the Jajman, usually the patron, often a landowner, and the Cumin, the client, who provided a specific craft or service like pottery, blacksmithing, washing clothes, and these relationships were hereditary.
Hereditary. So like, my family always uses your family's pottery. Generation after generation.
Yeah.
Like a permanent village contract passed down.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. Key things were, the relationships were seen as permanent and hereditary. Payment wasn't usually cash, but in kind, typically grains or a share of the harvest. And for the Camins, the service providers, it often meant some security guaranteed work from their patrons. W.H. Weiser, an anthropologist who studied this, saw it as kind of paternalistic, ensuring the Camins' basic needs were met.
Okay. Paternalistic, secure. But I sense a but coming. There's usually a debate about these things, right? Was it really all peaceful interdependence, or was it, well, exploitative?
You're right, there's definitely a debate. While Weiser saw reciprocity, others like Thomas Beitelman were much more critical. He basically called the Jajman the exploiter, seeing the system as almost feudal. The argument was that service castes were often underpaid, lacked bargaining power, and were essentially tied to serving the Jajmans. But then you have scholars like Harold Gould who said, hold on, it wasn't just about economic exploitation. It was rooted in ideas of purity and impurity, and often involved mutual obligations that felt almost like kinship ties, not just a cold transaction. So it's complex.
Definitely sounds complex. And how has this system held up over time? Is it still around?
Well, the Jajmani system has been seriously declining for a while now. Lots of reasons. The shift towards a cash economy is a big one. Then there's the rise of more commercial attitudes, people wanting market rates. You've got banks and cooperatives appearing in villages, changing how finance works. Plus, better transportation means rural markets are less isolated.
And I guess people moving away plays a part too. Like if the village barber moves to the city.
Exactly. Migration to urban centers for better jobs, the availability of cheap factory-made goods even in villages, and crucially, growing political awareness among groups like the scheduled castes, they started questioning these traditional obligations. There's a really striking example from a village called Bisipada in Orissa. Traditional washermen and cowherds, who were Kamines in the Jajmani system, actually left those relationships. Why? To take up jobs in government schemes like MG and Regie, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act. It offered guaranteed wages, often better pay. It shows how these big economic shifts directly undercut those old hereditary ties.
Wow, that MG and Regie example really hits home. Okay, so we have a clearer picture of what caste looks like, its components like Varna and Jati, and how systems like Jajmani worked and declined. But the big question, where did this whole incredibly complex system even come from? Feels like a massive historical puzzle.
It really is. And there are, unsurprisingly, many theories about its origins. No single easy answer. One of the oldest is the divine origin theory, often found in ancient Hindu scriptures. It suggests the four Varnas emerged from different parts of the creator god Brahma's body. It nicely links caste to religious ideas like karma and dharma, your past actions determining your birth, basically a cosmic job assignment.
Yeah, I can see how that provides a powerful justification. But I imagine modern scholars find issues with that.
Oh, definitely. Critics point out it's, well, biologically not sound, and more importantly, it conflates Varna with Jati. As we said, Varna is the broad category, Jati is the local reality, and they aren't the same thing. Then you have the Brahmanical Theory. Some scholars, like Abbé Dubois way back, argued that the Brahmins themselves cleverly cooked up the whole system. The idea is they did it to preserve their own ritual purity and cement their position at the top, imposing restrictions on everyone else, especially the Shudras.
So like a strategic power play by the priests to keep themselves on top.
That's the essence of it. But critics, like J.H. Hutton, questioned if Brahmins really had the necessary political clout back then to impose such a massive social structure just by themselves. Social systems usually aren't just administrative decisions. Another major one is the racial theory, often associated with Herbert Risley. He suggested caste arose from interactions between migrating Aryan groups and the original inhabitants of India. Racial differences, endogamy, marrying within groups to maintain distinction, maybe seeing locals as inferior. This supposedly led to segregation and the emergence of different groups, maybe even outcast groups like the Chandals.
So a kind of ancient racial segregation that got baked into the social structure.
That's the idea. Then there's the occupation theory, linked to Nesfield. This one suggests it all started with jobs becoming hereditary. Over time, specific skills, pottery, weaving, metalwork got passed down within families. These families formed occupational guilds, and these guilds eventually hardened into castes.
Right, so if your family were priests for generations, you became the Brahmin caste. If you were potters, the potter caste. Sounds pretty straightforward.
It does seem logical. The idea is that the perceived importance of certain jobs, like the priest's ritual duties, naturally gave those groups higher status. But critics say occupation alone doesn't explain everything. For example, the status of farming castes varies hugely across India. It's not uniform. Finally, there's the evolutionary theory. This basically says caste didn't just appear overnight from one cause. It evolved slowly, over a very long time, due to a whole mix of factors interacting. Things like hereditary jobs, yes, but also beliefs about ritual purity, maybe weak central government in early times, ideas about reincarnation and karma, different cultures and groups clashing and mixing, geographical isolation, even, much later, British colonial policies that sometimes reinforced caste divisions.
So no single smoking gun. It's like a stew with lots of ingredients simmering for centuries. Given all these different theories, what does that tell us about how complex social systems form in general? It's never just one thing, is it?
Exactly. It tells us that these deeply embedded social structures rarely have a simple, single origin story. They emerge from this messy interplay of culture, economics, politics, religion, historical accidents, all layering on top of each other over vast stretches of time. It really underscores that social systems are dynamic, constantly being shaped and reshaped, not static things created at one point.
That's a really important point because, you might think of caste as this totally rigid, unchanging stone wall. But what's fascinating from the sources is that it's actually been incredibly dynamic and adaptable.
You're absolutely right. It seems rigid on the surface, but there's always been some level of social mobility within the system. Emma and Srinivas gave us a key concept here, Sanskritization. This describes the process where a lower-ranked Hindu caste, or maybe even a tribal group, starts adopting the customs, rituals, lifestyle, and ideology of a higher, often twice-born caste. The goal is usually to try and raise their own social standing in the local hierarchy.
So, if a lower group starts acting more like Brahmins, maybe becoming vegetarian, performing certain rituals, hoping to get more respect and climb that ladder. Can you give an example?
Sure. A classic example is the Lingayats in Karnataka. They came from various caste backgrounds, but adopted many Brahminical practices after embracing a specific form of Shaivism, a branch of Hinduism. Or, in Maharashtra, some groups within the Marathas, traditionally seen as Shudras, emphasized warrior traditions and claimed Kshatriya status. It's important to remember, though, as Srinivas pointed out, this is usually a positional change. The group might move up a rung on the ladder, but the ladder itself, the hierarchical system, doesn't really change. And it's not always just simple imitation. Sometimes it's framed as a kind of challenge and revolt against their lower status, a way to assert a new, more respected identity.
That's a subtle but really important point. It's changing position within the system. What about outside influences? Like, what did British rule do?
Oh, that brings us to Westernization, another concept from Srinivas. This refers to all the changes that happened in Indian society and culture because of over 150 years of British rule. It affected everything: technology, institutions like schools and law courts, ideology, values like secularism or democracy. Think about practical things, like people starting to use dining tables instead of eating on the floor, or more profoundly, Brahmins taking up professions like modern medicine, which might have been traditionally off limits due to purity rules, or even delaying child marriage under the influence of Western ideas.
So new jobs, new schools, new ideas pouring in. Did Westernization clash with Sanskritization, or could they happen together?
It's a fascinating mix. Sometimes Westernization actually helped Sanskritization. For example, the British built railways, which made it easier for people to go on pilgrimages to major religious centers where they could observe and adopt high caste practices more easily. But Westernization also offered another path. Lower castes could pursue Western education and get new kinds of jobs, sometimes seeing that as a better way to achieve equality and bypass the traditional hierarchy altogether, rather than trying to climb within it through Sanskritization. And there's one more dynamic worth mentioning: the tribe-caste continuum. Scholars like F.G. Bailey and Surjit Sinha talked about how, over time, tribal groups living near Hindu societies could gradually absorb caste features. They might adopt Hindu gods, settle down into agriculture, maybe claim a link to a particular varna, and eventually become integrated into the local caste structure.
Like those examples of the Bhumij and Gonds in central India imitating Rajput warrior customs to become recognized as castes.
Exactly. Or tribal groups in Tripura adopting the Bengali language used by the king and incorporating Hindu deities. It shows movement into the caste system. Interestingly, the reverse could also happen sometimes: incoming groups adopting tribal ways, a process called tribalization. It shows the boundaries weren't always fixed. But despite all these changes, Sanskritization, Westernization, tribe-caste interactions, some core features have shown remarkable staying power. While commensality rules, restrictions on eating together, have definitely loosened up a lot, especially in cities and public spaces, the connubium, the rule of marrying within your deity, remains incredibly strong. Intercaste marriage is still relatively uncommon, especially in rural areas.
That's really striking. It suggests that maybe public life is changing faster than private family life. Like who you eat lunch with at work might be different, but who you bring into your family through marriage, that boundary seems much harder to cross. Okay, this is getting really interesting. How does power actually work within this system? And how is that changing in modern India? It can't be static, right?
Not at all. And this is where Srinivas's concept of a dominant caste is so useful again. A dominant caste isn't necessarily the highest in ritual terms, like Brahmins. It's the caste in a particular village or region that holds the most power on the ground. This usually means they are numerically strong, they own a significant amount of land or control local economic resources, and consequently, they wield considerable political influence. High ritual status helps, but land and numbers are often key. They tend to influence local decision-making, settle disputes, and basically run the show in the rural economy.
So it's about real-world clout, not just ritual rank. Land and numbers. That makes sense. Can we see this playing out somewhere specific?
Yes, let's go back to that village of Bisipada in Orissa. F.G. Bailey studied it back in the 1950s, and others have revisited it since.
Yeah.
Traditionally, the Sudha caste, who were warriors and local revenue collectors, were clearly the dominant caste. They owned most of the land, controlled village affairs. They were the power brokers.
Traditionally dominant. But things changed. What happened to challenge the Sudha's position?
Big changes happened. By the time researchers looked again decades later, say around 2013, the picture was very different. A major factor was land reforms in 1976. Land was taken from some Sudha landowners and redistributed, crucially, to scheduled caste families, particularly the Panas. Owning land, even small plots, gave the SEs a new economic base and, importantly, a huge boost in confidence and self-esteem. Then add government programs like MGN-REGA providing alternative employment. This combination significantly weakened the Sudha's economic group, and this economic shift translated into political power. SC members started winning positions like the village head, the Sarpanch. The Khanda tribe also gained political prominence later.
Wow. So land reform and government jobs directly led to a political power shift. Was there resistance? Did it spill over into other areas like religion?
Absolutely. The Shiva temple dispute in Bisipada is a powerful example of this shift playing out. The SCs, mainly the Panas, had been fighting for the right to enter the main village temple for decades, since the 1950s. They finally succeeded, with police help, in 1975. That itself was huge, but it didn't stop there. Later, in 1984, a respected Pana man named Narendra Sahani, a retired army guy who became a popular sarpanch, actually challenged the traditional Sudar ritual head, Adhikari, for leadership roles within the temple management. That's a direct challenge not just to social exclusion, but to the ritual authority that underpinned the old dominance. It shows a massive shift in confidence and power.
That Bisipana story is incredible. What really stands out to you about how those traditional power structures are changing? What tools are people using now? It seems like laws and government programs are really making a difference.
What's striking is how formal rights and economic empowerment schemes become real tools for social change. It's not just about cultural shifts like Sanskritization anymore. Legal entitlements, land ownership, access to government jobs, these provide concrete resources for marginalized groups to assert themselves, gain confidence, and challenge the old hierarchies directly, both economically and politically, right there at the village level.
And zooming out to the national level, with democracy, everyone gets a vote, right? And there are reservations. How has that changed the political game for caste? Numbers must suddenly matter hugely.
Immensely. Modern democratic politics in India, with universal adult suffrage and reservations in legislatures and government jobs for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes, OBCs, has made numerical strength absolutely vital. This has led to intense political competition, sometimes called caste war, but also to strategic political mobilization along caste lines. Lloyd and Suzanne Rudolph identified different ways this happens. First, there's vertical mobilization. This is more traditional, where local notables, maybe a former landlord or princely figure, rally support from their dependents across different castes who live in their area of influence. It relies on those older patron-client ties. Second, horizontal mobilization. This is where leaders mobilize support within their own caste or a group of related castes, often across a wider region. They build solidarity based on shared caste identity and interests. Think of large caste associations or federations like the Kshatriya Sabha in Gujarat, which brought together various Rajput-related groups to act as a political bloc.
Okay, so moving from local patrons gathering followers to broader caste groups uniting for political clout. That's a big change in how politics works.
It is. And then there's a third type, differential mobilization. This happens when divisions emerge within a single large caste group, often based on class or economic interests. For instance, after land reforms, richer landowners and poorer tenants within the same Rajput caste in Rajasthan formed different political associations, like the Bhuswami Sangh, because their economic interests diverged. It shows that even a single caste isn't always unified politically. The key thing to understand is that while caste identity remains a very powerful factor in politics, the way castes align themselves is fluid, it's strategic. Traditional ritual hierarchy doesn't automatically determine who allies with whom in the quest for political power.
Okay, so we've traced this from ancient origins through its structure, the changes, the power dynamics, which brings us to the big question, what's the future? After all this adaptation and change, is the caste system finally fading away in India, or is it just shape-shifting again?
That's the million-dollar question, really. And sociologist Yogendra Singh laid out two main competing hypotheses about caste's future. The first is what he called the mode of production hypothesis. This basically argues that yes, caste is declining. Proponents, both Marxist and non-Marxist scholars like Kingsley Davis, point to things we've discussed. Industrialization, urbanization, the loosening of rules about eating together, commensality, even a slow increase in intercaste marriage, more people moving into jobs unrelated to their traditional caste occupation, and the weakening of old structures like caste councils and the judge-mani system.
So the argument is that as India modernizes its economy, the old caste divisions based on birth and ritual just can't hold up, and it gradually transforms into a system more based on class economics, education, achievement.
That's the core idea, yes. A transformation into a class system as the main form of social layering. But then there's the second hypothesis, the caste resilience hypothesis. This perspective argues that, actually, modernization doesn't kill caste. In some ways, it activates and even enlarges its functions. Caste transforms, adapts to the new context, but its basic character isn't lost.
It finds new jobs to do, so to speak, adapting rather than disappearing. It really does sound like a master of adaptation, doesn't it?
It certainly seems that way sometimes. This view suggests caste continues to be a vital source of social identity, community belonging, and importantly, a ready-made network for political mobilization. M.N. Srinivas himself noted how modern things like better communication and transport could actually strengthen caste ties by allowing members spread across wider areas to organize and pursue common interests, forming those caste associations we mentioned. In many ways, caste groups can function a bit like a social safety net or a kinship network, providing support, connections, maybe even acting like informal welfare groups or political lobbying groups. So, to wrap up that point, while caste has definitely changed enormously, its complete disappearance seems, frankly, like a distant reality. As long as it keeps performing these crucial social, psychological, and political functions for people, and as long as its underlying principles are still accepted by many, it seems likely to persist in some form, even if it looks very different from how it did centuries ago.
That's a really sobering but important conclusion. Okay, that brings us towards the end of this deep dive. Let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways for everyone listening. First, remember caste is this incredibly complex, hierarchical social system. It's rooted in hereditary groups defined by birth, with strict rules, especially around marriage, endogamy, and often linked to traditional ideas of ritual purity and pollution.
Second, we stressed that Jabedi, not the broader four Varnas, is the real operational unit on the ground. Thousands of these local endogamous jatis shape everyday life, marriage patterns, and traditional occupations.
Third, that traditional Jajmani system, the hereditary exchange of goods and services between castes and villages, is significantly declining. Modern economic forces, cash payments, migration, and government programs like MG and RGA have really eroded it, as we saw in Bisipada.
Fourth, don't forget caste is dynamic, it's not static. We saw social mobility through Sanskritization, lower castes adopting higher customs, and westernization, impact of British rule, modern education, jobs. Plus, the tribe caste continuum shows how groups could move between tribal and caste identities.
Fifth, the idea of a dominant caste is crucial for understanding local power. It's not just about ritual status, but about land, numbers, and economic clout. The Bisipada example powerfully showed how this dominance could be challenged and shift over time due to land reforms and new economic opportunities for marginalized groups.
And finally, in modern Indian politics, caste identity is alive and well. It's a key factor in political mobilization, leading to strategic alliances and competition. Whether caste is ultimately declining or just transforming remains a big debate, with strong arguments for its enduring resilience through constant adaptation. So maybe a final thought to leave you with. As India continues to change so rapidly, particularly in cities, how might those deep-seated ideas of purity and pollution continue to subtly influence social interactions and maybe even new forms of hierarchy, even if the more obvious caste markers seem to fade? It's something to ponder.
That's a great question to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the truly fascinating, complex,